Like any child of the 90s, I had a robust collection of movies recorded from the TV onto VHS tapes. There was Annie, complete with commercial breaks for McDonald's Happy Meals and sun-kissed fruit gummies, and the seasonal favorite, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. There was A League of Their Own and Fried Green Tomatoes, and to no one's surprise, I now date women. Marion Stokes also recorded TV onto VHS tapes, except she did it 24 hours a day on multiple channels for 35 years. When she passed away in 2012, she left behind over 70,000 VHS tapes containing countless hours of footage. Filmmaker Matt Wolf set out to document this obsessive documenter in his new film, Recorder, the Marion Stokes Project, which will premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival later this month. Matt, welcome to 112BK.
Thanks for having me.
What was the news event that started this, or why did Marion start recording in this fashion? I know in the film you talk about how at first it was because she liked Star Trek and maybe she missed an episode and wanted to catch up on it later. But what was the impulse that set her off on this trajectory of recording news all the time?
Well, it was really the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979. So many people and scholars consider this the birth of the 24-hour news cycle, but basically it was kind of a soap opera of television news about the hostage crisis and would the hostages come out and what political maneuvers were happening behind the scenes and conspiracies. And that's what really initiated the television show Nightline. And Nightline proved to be this big hit that could compete and stand up against, late night Johnny Carson, et cetera. And so I think people started to recognize that there was an appetite for this kind of real-time news. And Marion saw that, and she recognized that news was becoming this kind of pervasive and persuasive medium, and she wanted to do something about it to protect the truth.
So many people across America are tuning in nightly. Why is Marion recording?
I think she intuited that there was important information that was being lost, and she didn't want anything to be lost. She thought in order to protect the truth and to understand the bias and discrepancy in facts that was happening that early in the reporting of television news, that there needed to be a definitive and comprehensive record. And little known to most people is that television stations didn't save all of their programs. They were discarding them and into the trash can of history. But fortunately, Marion saved it. So it's a pretty unprecedented record of the news and how it was represented on media, but also things like television commercials and talk shows and local programs and PSAs, things that might seem marginal or small, but that Marion recognized there was historical value to as well.
So let's zoom out a little bit and maybe tell me a bit about Marion and why she cared so much about protecting the truth, as you say.
Well, Marion was born around the Great Depression. She went through the foster care system and was passed from family to family. And when she kind of got older, she became a radical communist in the 1950s. She was involved particularly in activism around Cuba and better understanding and sympathy for the Cuban Revolution. And that's at the point where she had a child and she became divorced and was a single mother. So during that time as an activist, I think she was surveilled by the FBI like many communists of that period, and I think developed a kind of nuanced, multidimensional kind of picture of politics and the representation of politics in the media. So in the 1960s, she took a job producing a local television show called Input. And it was there where she would meet her future husband, John Stokes. And I think it was there where she really came to understand the effect of media to affect public opinion. So these were kind of consciousness-raising sessions that she hosted. And I think that was a transformative experience that ultimately catalyzed the taping project.
As somebody who hosts a local TV show, I am very into the design of this show.
Oh my
Input.
God, it's so good.
They're
right?
up on orange dioceses, and they're facing antagonists.
Yeah, it's beautiful. They have these elaborate wood stages, and it just shows the kind of intention behind this thing. And it was kind of countercultural in a way. They would have ex-prisoners next to Pete Seeger, next to a secretary and a nun, and it just represented this diverse kind of range of the public, and they had really dynamic and engrossing conversations.
We need more nuns on this show.
Yeah, right.
So we'll work on that. So you mentioned that she was a communist, and she was being groomed as a leader of the Communist Party because she was African American, because she was incredibly intelligent and outspoken. And so the FBI had a file on her. Do you think that the fact that she was surveilled had any impact in what she then saw as her own surveilling of the media?
I think she was more concerned about doing her project privately because of that. Oftentimes we think of archives as really being institutional, or having institutions of power kind of, say this is important to collect and we're going to do it. And she did that privately, which is really rare. And I think part of the reason she did it privately and kind of insisted on her privacy is because she had seen abuses of power and she had been surveilled, and that had an effect on her life.
So maybe we can show a clip from the movie. This is her secretary, I believe, who talks a little bit about who she was and what she was like.
Very mysterious and very private. Her husband, John, would come out and talk to me, and I would speak to Marion through the door. She would open the door maybe an inch and talk to me. I would say it was 3 or 4 months before I actually met her. We were getting close to finishing their place, and they said they would like me to start working for them, helping them do things. I was kind of shocked because, I'd never, been with someone that had so much stuff. They had enormous amount of furniture and archives, magazines, books. She read about 11 newspapers a day, and I don't think she ever threw one out.
So later in life, she became fantastically wealthy. Tell me a little bit about how she found herself able to just record TV 24 hours a day.
It's very unexpected. When I first heard about her story, I had no idea that she was fabulously wealthy and she lived in the kind of fanciest apartment building in Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia. And Marion, beyond being savvy about politics and the news, was a very gifted investor. And she recognized trends in media and technology very early, and beyond just understanding them, she acted on them. So when Macintosh Computer released, when Apple released the Macintosh Computer in 1984, she acted, and she became an avid investor and collector of Apple products. And through that and other technology and real estate investments, she became a very wealthy woman. She had married a man who came from wealth, but her investments and her savvy in the marketplace kind of enhanced that.
And you just referred to her as a collector. So it wasn't just the VHS tapes, the 70,000 VHS tapes. She collected Apple products. She collected newspapers, magazines. She had apartments filled with things. And one of your subjects in the film talks about the difference in history's eyes between hoarders and collectors. Can you distinguish the difference between those for me?
Yeah, I really think it's who decides what's valuable. To some people, every single newspaper from the past 15 years is of value, and to other people, it's just trash. So I think it's during Marion's lifetime, a lot of what she was doing was kind of cast away as hoarding or pathological, when in fact we now look at it and can recognize that there was insight behind it. So I think in terms of collecting, it's really in the eye of the beholder in terms of what's valuable to save.
Do we know if she ever went back and watched the tapes that she recorded, or did she just save them for posterity?
Yeah, she wasn't analyzing, editorializing, or interpreting the news. She was just capturing it. Of course, as an individual, she had her own point of view and kind of optics over the kind of mechanisms of news. But I think for her, it was more about creating a comprehensive and definitive archive so that people could use it in the future.
And worth mentioning that she started out as a librarian.
Exactly.
So that archival impulse is strong.
Yeah, she had a career as a librarian, and then she took it inside into the house.
Mm-hmm. And what happened after she passed away in 2012?
Well, as you can imagine, the task of kind of cleaning up this kind of project was overwhelming. And the film, in a lot of senses, is about Marion and her relationship with her son. And it was a complex and often kind of troubled relationship. But at the end of her life, she asked him to kind of be the executor of her estate and to make sure her life's work wasn't in vain. So Michael searched and searched for some home for these tapes. They put the 70,000 tapes into storage pods, and there was part of them that thought, these are just going to be thrown away. But what happened is that they found the Internet Archive in San Francisco, which is a very unconventional library, that agrees to digitize huge volumes and corpuses of analog collections with media. And so those storage pods were shipped across the country from Philadelphia to San Francisco.
You create this kind of scaffolding against which her life plays out. So all of the major events from the late 70s up until her death are featured, as well as recurring themes such as violence by the police against Black people. In some ways, it reminded me of Christian Marclay's The Clock, except instead of like every minute of the day, it was like every year.
Yeah, I wanted to create a kind of unconventional timeline. What I found going through the tapes is, you know, the fall of the Berlin Wall was maybe less interesting than the fall of Miss America's pageant stage. Neither are in the film, but it was the kind of marginal histories or the forgotten local news stories, things that people don't always think about or know about that were often the most interesting things that pointed back to Marion. But I tried to treat well-known current events like 9/11 that all of us witnessed on television. I tried to show them through the guise of this archive in a new and unconventional way that makes you reconsider these experiences we've collectively had through television.
I mean, the 9/11 scene is stunning, if I may say.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to talk about it or if that's like a spoiler, but if you feel comfortable talking about it, I would love for people to know about it.
Sure. I mean, we show the minutes in which the news of 9/11 broke with 4 screens side by side. So you see in real time how each network started reporting the breaking news of 9/11. And what's disarming and uncanny is to see the kind of inane or, you know, benign programming on news that was happening before it. It really shows you the flow of the 24-hour news cycle and how in real time all the news networks catch on like wildfire to something that's happening. So I think for everybody, it puts them into a place where they remember the moment that they found out about that in real time and how we were all kind of viscerally connected through this moment and glued to the television.
Absolutely. And it's these 4 quadrants. And the top left is CNN, which has it before anyone else. And exactly what you said, it puts you in the moment of there was a time before I knew about 9/11, and all of a sudden I knew about 9/11.
Yeah, and everything was different, especially in the media. Everything was different from that point on.
Yeah.
I think there's other events like the Challenger, to some extent, the Iranian hostage crisis that people experienced through television, and it was a collective experience. I don't know if that happens as much today, hopefully nothing like 9/11, but there are just a few things that we all know through television or JFK's assassination.
So much of the film is about who decides what's important, what makes it onto the news, how it's portrayed, and about how we don't know what's important until afterwards often, which is why it's important to cast this wide net and then we can go back through. Like, I'm thinking of the moment where we see Kellyanne Conway, a young Kellyanne Conway in the 90s on the news, which at the time was like, oh, Kellyanne Conway. Now it's like, Kellyanne Conway.
Yeah, that's what's so unique about the archive is someone in the film says archives predict futures. It's kind of like, you know, so often we look to the past but to try to better understand today, but in terms of archives, it's kind of impossible to know what from the past is going to be significant in the present or into the future, and that is the rationale that guides archivists to collect everything. Is you never know what's going to be important.
It seems as if your own experience as the director of this film mirrors a little bit the experience of a news executive, in that you had to decide what of this archive was important enough to make it into the film. How do you think your own point of view impacted the narratives and the micro-narratives that you weave throughout this film?
Yeah, of course, as I'm speeding through that footage, as I mentioned, 10 times pace, like, I'm marking things that just appeal to me aesthetically, content-wise. And of course, in various iterations of the film, there was lots of stuff that was really interesting to me or tapped into my preoccupations and fascinations, but I would have to stop myself and to think, Marion's a very mysterious woman. We need to figure out how this material points to her and how she points to this material. So I really tried to sit in her place and to try to think how a story might appeal or affect her as a viewer, given what I knew about her interests in the mechanics of media, in communism and the American government's relationship to it, into race and race politics, into technology and the emergence of new technology. These are things that were such big threads in her life. I tried to often choose stories that intersected with those subjects as well.
She does emerge as a very mysterious character, and I think I understand her motivations on a cerebral level, but there's this other storyline that I don't quite understand, which is that she didn't have a relationship with her son, Michael, as you mentioned, or her stepdaughters. And in fact, as she delved deeper and deeper into this recording project, she distanced herself from them. Do you have any insight into that? And also that she built a sort of chosen family afterwards with her staff.
Mm-hmm. I think obviously this kind of project involves a certain amount of control, controlling an overwhelming cascade of information, trying to organize it, trying to make sense of it. You can't control human relationships, and Marion wasn't good at that. And I also think that you could say she made certain sacrifices to pursue this project, and those sacrifices were really hurtful to people in her family and people around her. And it doesn't mean what she did was not valuable or insightful, but it was at the expense of human relationships. And I think that's true of a lot of people who pursue work that's unprecedented. But I also think that this is a family story, and there's a lot of tragedy as well as triumph in it.
Do you think that the bonds that she forged with her staff, with her chauffeur, her nurse, and her secretary, towards the end of her life, do you think that's because she had more control since they were working for her?
Yeah, totally. And I think, when her husband died, Marion was alone. She had alienated a lot of her family, and this group of people provided a kind of support and camaraderie that she didn't have, but they also were a group of people who helped her reconnect and to forge a new relationship with her son at the end of her life. So it's a pretty unconventional family story.
So how long were you working on this film?
Ooh, I think I was working on this film 4 to 5 years. It's been a long haul. As you can imagine, indexing that collection, digitizing the tapes, going through them, let alone doing all the production. It's a process that unfolded over a long period of time.
So if people want to attend the world premiere, can they do that?
There are a limited amount of tickets left. I don't know for how long, but the film is premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival, but it will surely be back in New York.
Excellent. Matt Wolf, thank you so much for joining us. The film is called Recorder, and I hope that people catch it at Tribeca or other festivals, hopefully in theaters after that.
Great. Thank you.